Wyoming Territory, June 1879. The sun burned hot over the dry plains as Elijah Merritt pulled his bay gelding to a stop in front of the weathered jailhouse of Buckhorn Bluff. Dust clung to his boots and coat, and sweat soaked the collar of his shirt, but he did not seem to notice. He swung down from the saddle and tied the reins to the hitching post, the silver coins in his coat pocket heavy with purpose. Inside the jail, behind rusted bars and a thick wall of silence, sat the girl he had once planned to marry, Elira Me Monroe. He had not heard her name spoken in 6 years, not since the day she vanished from the mining town of Sweetwater without a letter or a goodbye. "Elijah Merritt," the sheriff said, squinting up at him from his desk. "Ain't seen you in these parts since. I heard you got a woman locked up in there," Elijah said, his voice flat. "Charges?" The sheriff leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Elira Monroe, caught stealing a horse out near Red Canyon, claims it was hers. Rancher claims otherwise. She's got 3 weeks left on a 2-month sentence, unless someone posts bond." Elijah's jaw worked. "How much?" $76 in silver." Without a word, Elijah reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He opened it and counted out the coins one by one on the desk. The sound of silver hitting the wood echoed in the quiet room. The sheriff looked up. "You sure about this? She ain't the same girl you used to know. She came back different. Trouble's all she seems to find." Elijah met his eyes. "I did not ride 200 miles to hear your opinion." The sheriff sighed and got up to fetch the keys. The cell door creaked open. Elira stood slowly from the cot, barefoot, her dress threadbare, her face drawn. Her dark brown hair was tangled, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. But when she looked at him, something in her expression flickered like a spark catching dry wood. "Elijah." Her voice cracked, rough from too many quiet days. He did not answer right away. He just stood there, staring at the woman who had once known every part of his soul. "You are free," he said finally. "Come on." She walked out of the cell slow, like she did not believe it. Her hands were trembling. She stopped in front of him, close enough he could see the way her lip quivered. "Why?" she whispered. "Come on," he said again, softer this time. They stepped out into the bright sun together. She blinked at the light, shielding her eyes. Elijah untied his horse, then grabbed the blanket roll from the back and handed it to her. "I have a room at the inn for the night," he said. "You will eat, rest. Then we ride." "Ride where?" He looked at her. "Home." Elira swallowed hard. "Sweetwater burned last winter. Everything's gone." "Not everything," he said. "I still have land. House is standing, needs fixing, but it is there." She stared at him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" He paused. "Because 6 years ago I let you walk away. I am not doing it again." Her eyes filled, but she blinked fast and nodded. That night she ate stew with shaking hands while he sat across the table and watched her. They did not talk much. The silence between them was thick with things they had never said. Later, when she laid down in the bed he paid for, she turned to him before he left the room. "I did not steal that horse," she said. "I know. I had nothing. No money, no food. I was trying to get to Cheyenne. Someone said my brother might be there." Elijah nodded. "You do not have to explain anything to me tonight." She hesitated. "I was not sure you would even recognize me. I would have known you with my eyes closed." The next morning they rode out before dawn. She rode behind him, arms around his waist, her cheek resting against his back. He felt every breath she took. Every time her fingers tightened on his coat, it felt like something inside him came undone and stitched itself back together again. By midday, they reached the edge of the canyon ridge that overlooked the valley where Elijah's homestead still stood. The roof was sagging, the barn half collapsed, but it was there. She looked at it in silence for a long time. Then she said quietly, "You really meant to take me back?" "Elira," he said, turning in the saddle to face her. "I did not come to save you, I came to marry you." Her breath hitched. "I asked you once before," he said, "and you said yes. I never stopped meaning it." She stared at him, eyes wide. "I know you have been through hell," he said, "but I still see you, I still love you. We can start again. Right here." Her lips parted. Her chest rose and fell fast. Then, without a word, she leaned forward and kissed him soft, desperate, and full of 6 years of heartbreak. When she pulled back, her voice shook. "Yes." They rode the rest of the way down together, and by nightfall they stood in front of the old house. He pulled a ring from his coat, plain silver, worn smooth from years of being carried in his pocket. He took her hand and looked her in the eye. "Elira me Monroe. Will you be my wife?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I already am." By late June, the wind across the valley had warmed, carrying the scent of sage and pine through the open doorway of Elijah's house. The floorboards creaked under their boots as they stepped inside for the first time together. Dust lay thick across the table and shelves, and a bird's nest sagged in the rafters above the hearth. Still, the walls stood strong, and the stone chimney hadn't crumbled. Elira ran her fingers across the windowsill, brushing away cobwebs. "There's work here," she said, not quite asking. "I've only kept the land clear and the fences up. Inside's been waiting for hands other than mine," Elijah replied, setting down his saddlebag. She nodded once, then turned toward the back room without another word. When she returned, she held up a quilt folded tight around something small and pale. "Elijah," she said, her voice low, "this was your mother's, wasn't it?" He crossed the room and took it from her gently. Inside was a carved wooden box, the lid worn smooth by years of use. He opened it, revealing spools of thread, a bone needle, and a small pair of shears. "She taught me how to mend shirts by lamplight," he said. "Hands steadier than mine ever were. I thought it was lost when the fire came through Sweetwater." Elira looked up at him. "It wasn't just the buildings that burned, was it?" He closed the box carefully. "No." Outside, a hawk cried overhead, circling high above the hills. Elijah moved to the door, watching the sky. "That ridge line," he said, nodding toward the north, "marks where the cattle wandered in spring. If we can fence it before the frost comes back, we'll have decent pasture by next season." She asked, stepping beside him. "If you mean to stay." "I didn't say I didn't," she said, and picked up a broom from the corner. By the third day, they'd cleared the kitchen of dust and patched 2 broken chairs. Elijah built a clothesline behind the house, and Elira planted onions in the dry earth near the well. They worked without many words, but the silence had softened. She no longer flinched when he passed too near, and he'd started leaving the door unlatched when he left to haul water. On the 5th evening, she brought in a tin pail from the stream and set it down on the counter. "How long have you been alone out here?" she asked, wringing water from her hem. "Too long. Long enough I forgot how quiet it really gets when there's no one else inside the house." "I used to think I liked quiet," she said. "Then I spent 2 years in towns where I didn't know a soul. Turns out, quiet's only good when you've got someone to share it with." She leaned against the wall, the light catching her collarbone where the fabric opened at her throat. Elijah looked at her, then down at the floorboards. "I've been meaning to ask," she said. "You said you never stopped meaning to marry me. Why didn't you come after me back then?" "I was too proud," he said, "and too angry. I thought you'd made your choice." "I left because my father was dying," she said quietly. "He sent word too late, and I didn't think you'd forgive me for going without telling you. I meant to come back, but by the time he passed, I didn't think I had anything left worth returning to." "You were wrong," Elijah said. "You still had me." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the dying light. "Do I still?" He crossed the room and took her hand. "You never stopped." That night they sat on the porch together, watching the stars bleed into the sky. A coyote howled far off, and the sound stirred something deep in her chest. "I'm not the same girl that left Sweetwater," she said, her voice close to breaking. "I'm not the same man," he answered. "But I still want the same life with you." She rested her head on his shoulder, the porch boards warm beneath them. "I think that's the only thing that hasn't changed," she said. They sat like that until the moon rose, and neither of them felt the cold. The sourdough starter took nearly a week to come alive again. Elira kept it near the hearth, feeding it flour and water at dawn before Elijah returned from clearing brush along the creek. She didn't ask where he found the starter jar. It was old and cracked near the rim, and looked like it had been buried in ash before being tucked away in the pantry. She stirred it slow with the same wooden spoon she used to cook beans that first week, her movements measured, eyes calm. One morning, as she shaped the dough on the counter, she said, "I saw a magpie on the roof this morning." Elijah wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the door frame. "They nest near the cottonwoods. You see just the one," she nodded. "Was missing a tail feather, still bold though. Stared me down like I owed it something." He chuckled quietly. "They do that. Little thieves, the lot of them." She looked down at the dough. "Maybe that's why I liked it." He didn't answer, just stepped outside and let the screen door shut behind him. By the time the bread came out of the iron stove, the cabin smelled of toasted grain and wood smoke. She set the loaf on a cloth to cool, then walked to the side window and watched Elijah work. He was mending the old fence line that ran along the south pasture, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hat low against the sun. The rhythm of his hammer against the wood matched the steady thud of her heart. She didn't call out, just watched him until the light shifted. That evening he came in with a fresh scrape across his forearm. She didn't ask what caused it. Instead, she cleaned it with boiled water and carbolic, then wrapped it in clean muslin from the trunk near the bed. "You could have left that post," she said, tying the knot. "No cow's been in that pasture for years. Still needs holding," he said. "Even if nothing leans against it now." She looked up at him, fingers resting on the cloth. "You always do that." "What's that?" "Fix what isn't yet broken, just in case it might be." "Not always," he said. "But sometimes it's the only way to keep things standing." She stepped back. "You're bleeding through your shirt." He pulled it off without protest and hung it on the peg near the door. She looked away then, not out of shyness, but because something in her chest tightened when she saw the long scar across his ribs, a pale, jagged mark that hadn't been there before. "That from the fire?" she asked. "No, before that. Range fight up near Big Horn." "You nearly die." "No. But the man who gave it to me did." She swallowed. "You bury him," he nodded once. The lamplight caught the edge of his jaw as he turned toward her. "You want to ask something? Go ahead." She didn't move. "Did you think I was dead too?" "Yes." She stepped closer. "And when you found out I wasn't?" "I stopped sleeping." Outside, wind blew through the porch rafters, but the house stayed still, as though holding its breath with them. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, voice low. "You're not. I don't know how to be someone else's comfort anymore. You don't have to be, you just have to be here." She reached out then, slow, and touched the edge of his bandage. "I can be here." His hand closed over hers, warm and sure. "You already are." They didn't kiss that night. Instead, she sat beside him on the bed while he read from an old almanac by lantern light. Her head rested against his shoulder, and their fingers stayed locked together in the space between them. In the morning, she rose before him and left a slice of bread on the table with a smear of plum jam from the last jar in the cellar. When he came in from feeding the mule, he found her outside, sleeves rolled, splitting kindling with slow, clean strokes. He didn't speak. Just picked up another log, held it steady for her, and let her swing. By midsummer, the roof had been patched, the pasture seeded, and the porch boards replaced. Neither of them said the word home aloud. But each time she stitched a hem or he sharpened the kitchen knives, it settled deeper into the bones of the house. One afternoon, as they walked the ridge above the cabin, a storm broke over the far hills. They stood watching it roll in dark clouds pulling low, lightning flashing behind sheets of rain too far to hear. Elira turned toward him, wind tugging at her skirts. "You still mean to marry me?" He looked at her, steady and sure. "I already did. I mean proper." With a parson and witnesses, he lifted her hand to his lips. "Then I'll ride to town tomorrow." She nodded once, her mouth trembling into something small and sure. "Good. I want to wear blue." He kissed her then, beneath the rising wind, and it was quiet between them again, quiet in a way that held no loneliness, only promise. The July sun filtered through the lace of cottonwood leaves as Elijah guided the wagon into Buckhorn Bluff again, reins loose in his hand. Elira seated beside him in a dress the color of creek water after rain. She had sewn it from bolts stacked in the mercantile's back room, trading dried herbs and 2 mornings' labor for the cloth. The sleeves were narrow, the collar high, and her hair, usually tied back for work, was braided and pinned low behind her neck. "Doesn't feel like a wedding day," she said, eyes on the road ahead. "Feels like morning," Elijah replied. "That's all it needs to be." They passed the livery, the smithy, and the church with its bell tower leaning ever so slightly eastward. The preacher, Reverend Talbot, stood outside with a Bible tucked beneath his arm and a wide-brimmed hat too large for his narrow frame. A pair of ranchers lingered by the general store porch, hats tipped back, watching them pass without comment. Inside the church, it smelled of pine and old paper. Dust motes drifted in the high light. No organ played. No rows of guests lined the pews. Only the preacher, the couple, and a witness, Mrs. Hawley, the widow who kept the boarding house and had once mended Elijah's shoulder when a stray nail tore his shirt. "You bring vows?" Talbot asked, flipping open to a page already worn at the corners. "I brought my word," Elijah said. "And I brought mine," Elira added. They stood facing each other on the wide plank floor, her hands trembling only once before his steadied them. "Speak plain," Talbot said. "God don't need poetry to hear truth." Elijah looked at her, his face unreadable but certain. "I'll keep you safe, not in word but in what I do. I'll build beside you, sleep beside you, bury what needs burying and raise what needs raising. You're mine and I'm yours. That's all I've got and all I'll ever need." Elira's voice was low but sure. "I'll walk beside you no matter where it leads. I'll stay when it's hard and I'll hold you when it's worse. You came for me when I didn't think there was anyone left who would. So I'll stay for you now for all our days." Talbot nodded once, then closed the Bible. "Then by the law of Wyoming Territory and the good Lord above, I reckon that's about enough." Mrs. Hawley gave Elira a handkerchief, though she didn't use it. Elijah signed the ledger with a steady hand, and Elira's name followed his in tight, neat script. They stepped into the sunlight married. Back at the wagon, Elijah lifted her by the waist and settled her onto the seat before climbing up beside her. She kept her hands folded in her lap until they'd cleared the edge of town, then slipped one into his without saying a thing. The road home took longer this time. He stopped by the creek to water the horses and she waded in, pulling her skirts to her knees, letting the cold run over her bare feet. He watched from the bank, one boot resting on a rock, arms folded across his chest. "You planning on baptizing yourself twice in one day?" he called. "Just rinsing off the dust of town," she said. "Weddings are dirtier business than I thought." She came back to the wagon with wet ankles and a smile that hadn't lived on her face in years. That night, they ate cornbread and beans with molasses drizzled on top, the last jar from the cellar. He lit the lamp and she pulled out the quilt she'd mended 2 days before, spreading it across the bed with slow care. When she turned, he was watching her from the doorway, hat in hand, eyes quiet. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I know," she replied. She blew out the lamp. Later, when the boards creaked beneath shared weight and the wind pressed soft against the shutters, neither one spoke. Words had already done what they needed to. They lay together with no space left between them, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting over hers on the quilt. Outside, a lone owl called once, then went still. Inside, they slept as though the past hadn't broken them wide open, only made more room for what was coming next. The heat broke in early August, the air shifting just enough to let breath settle easier in the lungs. A pair of late storms rolled down from the high country, leaving puddles in the wagon ruts and pulling fresh green from the brittle grass. On a morning edged and cool, Elira stood at the edge of the north pasture with her skirt pulled up above her boots, watching the sorrel mare pick her way along the fence line. The animal had wandered close from a neighboring ranch, no brand, ribs showing through her hide. Elijah had found her 3 days earlier near the Salt Lick and left her be, waiting to see if someone came looking. "She's got fight," Elira said, arms folded as Elijah joined her, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. "Didn't spook when I got near. Just watched me, same as she's watching now." He shifted the rope. "You thinking we keep her? I'm thinking she came here for a reason." He glanced sideways at her. "You believe in things like that?" "I don't know," she said, "but I believe in second chances." "That's near enough." They spent the morning coaxing the mare into the lower corral, Elijah moving slow, Elira holding a tin pail of oats just out of reach. It took time, the kind that passed quiet and patient, punctuated only by soft clucks of the tongue and the sound of hooves in mud. That evening, Elijah brought down the last of the cedar planks from the loft, stacking them beside the house. Elira met him at the door, a folded scrap of paper in her hand. "Letter came through Mrs. Hawley," she said. "From Cheyenne." Postmarks nearly rubbed off. He took it, eyebrows drawing together as he read. After a while, he lowered the paper. "My cousin's boy," he said. "The one who ran off 6 years ago. He's back, wants work, says he's trying to do right by his mother now. Will you take him on? I might." He was wild but not mean, just lost. She nodded. "You'd be good for him." He folded the letter and tucked it inside the ledger on the table. "You'd be better." The days grew shorter then, light fading sooner behind the hills. Elira began laying in dried beans and potatoes, tying bundles of sage and yarrow to the rafters where the scent could carry through the rooms. She stitched a curtain for the back window, one small enough to leave a strip of sky visible. One night, while Elijah sharpened his drawknife by lantern glow, she spoke without looking up from her mending. "I want to teach again. Not like before in town. Here, just a few children, maybe Sunday mornings." He looked over. "We've got space in the side room once I finish the bench." "I'd like that," she said. "It feels right, sharing something that held me together when nothing else did." He set the knife down. "You held yourself together, Elira. The rest just helped." She smiled, faint but sure. "Well, then I'd like to help someone else hold on, too." The following week, Elijah rode into Buckhorn Bluff and came back with a sack of nails, a worn second-hand reader, and a crumpled flyer advertising a harvest fair in early September. He handed her the flyer after supper. "Thought maybe we'd go. Bring preserves. Show folks we've got a name again." She traced the edge of the paper with her thumb. "You think they'll remember me? They might, but I know how they'll see you now. How's that, as my wife?" Strongest thing I've ever known." She leaned across the table and pressed her forehead to his. "Then let's go." The fair was held in a sun-baked field beyond the churchyard, with rows of tables covered in calico and burlap. Elira's jars sat beside pickled beets and apple butter, each one labeled in her neat script. Children tugged at sashes, older men drank cider from tin mugs, and the preacher's wife won the pie contest again. Elijah didn't leave her side until a boy of no more than 10 asked if she'd be teaching letters come fall. She crouched to answer him, eyes bright, and Elijah stepped back just enough to see the way the townsfolk looked at her now, not with suspicion, but with curiosity, with hope. On the ride home, she rested her head against his shoulder, the wagon wheels creaking over dry earth. "They didn't look at me like I was broken," she murmured. "You're not," he said. "You're mended." That's stronger than being whole. In the months that followed, the house filled with little things. A stack of slates, a row of jars labeled with chalk, the mare's coat growing glossy with care. Elijah built the bench, then a second one. And by winter, 6 children sat in the side room each Sunday with hands folded and eyes wide. One night, as snow gathered along the sill, Elira stood by the fire with a pot of warming milk and said, "I never told you what I dreamed of back when I was a girl." He looked up from his chair. "Tell me now." "I used to picture a place where nothing moved too fast, where the quiet didn't hurt. Just a porch and a man who didn't ask me to be anything I wasn't." He rose, crossed to her, and took the pot from her hands. "You have all that now." "I know," she said, "but it feels like more." He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, the kind that settled deep beneath the skin. They spent the night beneath the patchwork quilt, the fire crackling low, the wind tapping gentle against the shutters. No ghosts between them. No weight left unspoken. In spring, the mare foaled near the fence line and the children voted to name the colt Dusty. Elijah's cousin's boy arrived with a hat too big and manners too loose. But he took to chores quick and never talked back when Elira corrected his grammar. They planted corn and beans, and the pasture turned green again. In the evenings, Elijah read aloud from a worn book of folk tales, and Elira stitched until her eyelids grew heavy. Each day folded into the next, not perfect, but whole. And when the wind carried the scent of rain across the valley, they stood on the porch together, hands clasped, watching the sky. They had found their way home, not to the place they'd once known, but to something better, built with care, held with quiet faith, and lived in fully, side by side. Forever.